This is from the mainstream press. The timing of the US and Israeli attack on Iran bears symbolic meaning in Judaism. Ahead of the upcoming Jewish holiday of Purim, worshippers read the specific portion from the Old Testament known as Zachor. The passage from the book of Deuteronomy commands the ancient Israelites to remember an unprovoked attack by the nation of Amalek, and to eradicate the memory of Amalek once the Israelites are settled in their land. The passage is read publicly before Purim to fulfill the mitzvah of remembering Amalek as Israel's archetypal enemy. In Jewish tradition, Amalek is the archetypal enemy of Israel, with Haman in the book of Esther, set in Persia, which is modern-day Iran, identified as the Agagite, a descendant of the Amalekite king spared by Saul. This connection frames the Purim story as a continuation of the biblical mandate to eradicate the spirit of Amalek, representing an existential threat to the Jewish people. Now, the first thing as it relates to this is obviously the fact that the total lunar eclipse blood moon coming up on March 2nd and the 3rd, it's kind of overnight between those 2 days, will take place precisely when Purim is taking place this year. You can see here Purim will be the evening of Monday, March 2nd, 2026 to Tuesday, March 3rd, 2026, which is the same date and time that this total lunar eclipse blood moon will transpire. March's full moon brings rare blood moon lunar eclipse. Known as the worm moon, March's full moon will coincide with a total lunar eclipse, commonly called a blood moon, when the moon takes on a striking reddish color. The celestial event is expected to be visible across large parts of the United States. And in the United States in particular, it will occur during the early morning hours of March 3rd. So it's taking place at precisely the same time as Purim this year. And remember, this will be the last total lunar eclipse blood moon until December 31st, 2028, which, as I noted in a comment on my posts a while ago, you can see why so much was kind of jammed in to this period between the turning point and March 3rd, referring to Charlie Kirk's assassination as the metaphorical turning point with all of this stuff. That assassination took place on September 10th, 2025, 3 days after the September 7th total lunar eclipse blood moon. Symbolically, it was the turning point in this larger ritual, and we have seen the culmination of that turning point now as we head into the March 3rd total lunar eclipse blood moon. And for those of you who are new to all of this, it's important because it relates to Donald Trump, who is the moon child. He was born under a total lunar eclipse blood moon in 1946. Symbolically, they have associated him with eclipses for this reason, because he is the moon metaphorically eclipsing the sun as it relates to so many different layers of what we perceive as reality. And I've gone into that in so many other videos, I'm not going to do that here too much. Other than to remind you of one thing along these lines, which is the fact that a total lunar eclipse blood moon occurred on May 4th, 2004, which just so happened to be around 2 days before the airing of The Last One, which was the series finale of Friends. This relates to the ritual as it is depicted in a subconscious way in Leave the World Behind. What does the character seek to do throughout the whole film? Well, she's watching Friends and she desperately wants to see The Last One. And the end of Leave the World Behind is her pressing play on this episode, The Last One. Symbolically, she's pressing play on a total lunar eclipse blood moon because that's when this episode aired. It aired in the context of a total lunar eclipse blood moon. So, in the context of Leave the World Behind and everything that film represents, as it relates to the Moonchild ritual, Donald Trump being the personification of 9/11, the controlled demolition of the old world order as seen through the United States in general, and then its effect as the world empire on the rest of the world. In terms of that ritual, she's pressing play on it, you see. She started it, and obviously Leave the World Behind was released before his second term, which is that second plane flying into the second tower. And as it always does, this ties into the ritual as it relates to AI and your eyes and that fusion. 2001: A Space Odyssey, the screen at ground zero, quote unquote. You touch the screen, you go through it, and you see the moon and the star child, which metaphorically is what they have built in your mind through this larger ritual. And interestingly, the United States might end up experiencing something that's surely scripted and planned many decades ago, but it might end up experiencing quote unquote blowback from what's going on right now, what they have chosen to do as it relates to Iran and the Middle East in general. And that would relate to what they depict in Leave the World Behind, right? In a more tangible way as it relates to reality itself and what we experience. And surely that would tie into the border policy of the last decade or so and how people have been able to freely move around. And that's great cover for bringing things into the country and setting up organizations that would carry out something like this. And then, of course, it would be referred to in the same way they referred to the 9/11 operation. Oh, that was a terrorist attack. And there would be all kinds of logical, plausible evidence provided to prove this, quote unquote, right? Same formula all the time. I mean, that's what Israel did when they blamed Hamas for what happened on October 7th, which was the catalyst for this whole thing, which coincided with that great American eclipse, Aleph, over the country. All those paths coming together to make that shape. So it was the turning point with the Charlie Kirk assassination, and now this is the culmination of all of it. You know, there's a lot of people on the internet throwing stuff around about how, oh, they've been saying this stuff about Iran for 50 years and nothing ever happens. Well, it finally happened because within the script, it was time. They waited very patiently for the whole thing to line up with these total lunar eclipse blood moons and the ritual surrounding Donald Trump. It's all about opening that golden gate in Jerusalem. Remember this. And metaphorically, they're doing it in your mind. They're getting around the fact that it's sealed. And a part of that is with sorcery like Leave the World Behind, what they encode into that film in a subliminal, subconscious way. And principally, it's done through Friends, which is a theme from the first scene to the last scene, because that episode of Friends is Donald Trump. You see, he is that episode of Friends. He is the last one. And you can take that in so many different directions metaphorically as it relates to leaving the world behind. It's the last one for us as well, right? We're all going to leave this old world behind. We're entering into something new, a completely new dimension of perception. So we're leaving that old world behind. And I won't get bogged down in more layers of that kind of thing. Just note that these total lunar eclipse blood moons are coordinated with the script. And along those lines, speaking of the larger ritual, Donald Trump's second term was very carefully crafted to be him versus Kamala Harris. And when you go back and look at what happened, they very intentionally made Joe Biden out to be having some kind of early onset dementia. They very forcefully pushed that narrative in order to push him out, to get him to step out of the 2024 presidential race, so that Kamala could come in as the candidate, because they scripted her to be the symbol that was defeated by Donald Trump. Because when you look at her name, Kamala, it is subliminally Amalek. All you have to do is rearrange the letters. And I wrote up here Amalek backwards, which is Kalama, and that kind of gives you the sound of it. But then all you have to do is rearrange the letters, and you have Kalama Harris. Do you see what they did there? They very intentionally scripted Kamala Harris to be the candidate defeated by Donald Trump as he was about to fly that second plane into the second tower, metaphorically, before the controlled demolition. Because the Amalek story goes back to what I was discussing about Purim and Amalek being the archetypal enemy of Israel. And so you have the culmination of all of this propaganda for 50 years relating to Iran and the Middle East finally happening as Donald Trump defeats Amalek symbolically, and then he declares war on Iran, and they engage in these strikes on the country in the lead up to this total lunar eclipse blood moon that will coincide with Purim in 2026. They waited very carefully, so this was a perfect script along those lines. And you believe it if you're sucked into their propaganda because you don't understand the subconscious subliminal aspect of it that I just went into. You think these people are just power mad and they are doing this out of some kind of coincidence from just human beings interacting. Oh, we're just in this state on planet Earth where people are constantly at war. It's like, no, this is all very carefully scripted between all of these nations. And I'm not saying that every single leader who has ever been a leader of a nation was in on it. Obviously, that's not the case, or you wouldn't need to engage in coups all of the time, create the conditions for leaders to be ousted because they don't go along with it in some way. But it's kind of like Antarctica, where for some reason every single country agrees on the treaty governing that continent, keeping people out of it, yet they can't agree on simple stuff as it relates to anything else. So there is this structure when it comes to certain things that is united. It's just slowly revealing itself through this process. And that is all a part of the scripted conspiracy theory part of this, where it's revelation of the method, kind of. They're revealing themselves very slowly, but they're doing it through conspiracy theories in a way where you think you've discovered them when they wanted you to discover them. That was the whole point, because they need to destroy this old system so a new one can come into its place. And that is why Donald Trump was infused with this 9/11 resonance, because he is doing that. He is the catalyst for the controlled demolition of that system, which in effect is the United States, because the United States was used to create it, to create the beginning of it, to get everyone on the same page by force if they had to. But obviously it goes back to the very beginning, and it's had different centers of power throughout recorded history. The United States is just the latest iteration of that. Which is why they tell you that no empire lasts forever. Well, it's like, yeah, because they build it up and then they destroy it on purpose every time. And real quick, everything I just went into will explain why something like this is out there. A tweet from 2024 where Kamala says that President Trump will get us into a war with Iran. Well, she knows the script. She knew this was going to happen. But this spin on what she said is, oh, she's projecting like usual. And now the other side will use this and say, oh, look, she was right. We should have elected her. We were wrong. And it's like, no, you guys don't understand. They're both in on it. Okay. She knows the script. She says this knowing that it will be quoted now, and just further the divide to the people who still think this stuff is organic in some way. But no, symbolically, Kamala was Amalek and Trump defeated her, right? Trump defeated the arch enemy of Israel. And then symbolically, they are defeated right before Purim and the March 3rd, 2026 total lunar eclipse blood moon. So the moon child declares war on them as part of this larger ritual. And it has an effect because he was infused with all of this power through their propaganda. The other thing that I want to cover is the connection between what is going on in Iran and Jim Carrey being all over the news right before Donald Trump essentially declared war on them and these strikes transpired. On the surface, there is no connection, right? Well, that doesn't have anything to do with the other thing. Why would it have any relevance? Well, for the same reason anything has relevance when it's in the news cycle at the same time as something scripted like this strike on Iran was. This stuff is planned out very methodically in advance, and it's done in a subconscious, subliminal way where you are programmed, like I was discussing in the Marty Supreme video, to have this pop culture altar almost, right? It's this media altar that flips forward whenever they trigger it. And it's being triggered right now through war. I mean, that's one of the primary ways that it's done, through the trauma and fear and just that general energy associated with war. It puts you in this primal state where you kind of lose your higher intellect. But obviously a big part of how they do this programming is through movies and television and the news in general as it relates to all of that stuff. It's all one thing, ultimately. But these films prime you for this stuff before the fact. They did this with Jim Carrey via all of the films he has been in that tie into all of this stuff. The clearest example is The Truman Show, which is almost synonymous with conspiracy culture at this stage. But there's something much darker going on with Jim Carrey that relates to all of this in a way where he's sort of an omen of death. He's an omen that is negative in the sense that it's trying to siphon your energy. And I think that's why he was very intentionally given this Lifetime Achievement Award at the French Oscars right before this all transpired. And they had him show up in this plastic surgery face that really made him look different from how a lot of people remember him. But that's one of those things where he essentially retired from film in 2016, and then he's only been doing those Sonic movies where he's in a bunch of makeup too. So I don't know if people have really been paying attention to his face. And he's in his mid-60s at this point. Like, it's a very convenient way to get people chattering about nonsense, is what I'm trying to say. Oh, they cloned him. Oh, he's been replaced. Oh, it's someone else in a mask playing Jim Carrey. And it's like, look, all of those things are potentially possible. I'm not going to rule any of them out, but the most likely thing here is, hey, it's Jim Carrey. He's just old and had a bunch of plastic surgery. And he's acting real weird as a part of this whole thing. In the same way that he went on Jimmy Kimmel and acted real weird, making fun of all this conspiracy stuff. Remember, he's an actor. He plays characters. So they just go to him and say, hey, go out there and act way different from how you normally do. That'll get him talking. That'll get you in the cycle. Everybody will be talking about you. And especially in conspiracy circles, the two big stories right now are this Iran war and Jim Carrey. And that's by design, surely. But his films are filled with suicide, death, and just a lot of dark stuff. And that is sort of priming you in a subconscious way for the dark stuff that's going on in the world at the same time. Also, practically speaking, when you have a lot of these people in conspiracy circles who actually understand the surface layer to things, like a war that is scripted and has no real justification, at the same time they're saying that legitimate thing, you have them saying that Jim Carrey's a clone. Or, he's wearing a mask and it's not him, or they replaced him or whatever, right? So you're discrediting that very real thing they're talking about at the same time through a narrative like this. I mean, it's multifaceted as it always is. I'm trying to cover all the possibilities for you, but surely I'll leave some out. Anyways, the first thing I wanted to note is that the César Awards in France translates to Caesar in English. It's named after Cesare Baldaccini, but still, that translates to Caesar, which ties in the whole Caesar's Superdome aspect of the ritual at the last Super Bowl in New Orleans. The Gemini Man and the whole thing, as that related to Wicked and Gladiator with the twin Caesars being released on the day JFK was assassinated, 11/22, which was the same day Kendrick Lamar's album was released, GNX, who then was at the Super Bowl performing because he's a Gemini. So it was a whole Gemini Man, twin of 9/11 ritual at the New Orleans Superdome, which is now known as Caesar's Superdome. And at that time, Elon Musk was talking about the new Rome and the Golden Age. So he's given this award at the Caesars Awards, kind of tying that whole thing in. But this is what I wanted to get to as it relates to the darker narrative, where there's this Twitter account, AIDS Ventura Paz Detective, going into a lot of coincidences, quote unquote, that surround Jim Carrey. And I'll just read these tweets. Until you stumble upon a curious People magazine article concerning the suicide of Catriona White, Jim Carrey's ex. The article prompts you to remember a scene from Batman Forever when the Riddler stages his boss's murder as suicide. And as well, Jim Carrey having a real-life obsession with the number 23 years before his 2007 movie came out. And I should also note that they positioned Jim Carrey as some kind of fake spiritual guru later in his career. So you decide to watch the number 23 and later become perturbed by watching the movie's pair of protagonists, both played by Jim Carrey, witness not just one suicide, but 4. Since the real-life suicide of Carrey's ex-girlfriend is what brought you to the number 23, Carrey witnessing just one of those is immensely creepy enough, but 4 suicides. The 4th suicide also eerily echoes the cause of death for Charles Rocket, an actor known for playing the bad guy in Dumb and Dumber, and lesser known for slitting his own throat in real life. You later read that Rocket was chosen over an 18-year-old Jim Carrey for a spot on SNL. While this strikes you as motive, you dismiss the thought because it's beyond hysterical to even consider everyone's favorite rubber-faced wacky man slit a guy's throat. Now, the whole thesis here is that Jim Carrey is secretly a serial killer, and is that potentially true? Sure. I mean, anything is possible. Anything your mind can imagine is potentially possible. But the more likely scenario here is that Jim Carrey, as a meta character in Hollywood, has been seeded with certain themes. And one of them is this very dark death-suicide theme. And that is sort of being triggered in a subconscious, subliminal way via his character that he plays, Jim Carrey. Then it occurred to me that the aforementioned Batman Forever scene may have given Carrey the idea for this suicide crime scene masquerade M.O. To clear this hysteria out of my mind, I contact state police to report the death of Charles Rocket as a potential suicide perpetrated by Jim Carrey in actuality. The sergeant took me way more seriously than he should have, but said nothing was wrong with the report. Later on that day, I decided to watch Dumb and Dumber just to observe the energy between Carrey and Rocket. I'm not expecting the sophomoric comedy to fully convince me that Carrey slit co-star Charles Rocket's throat. And then he goes and watches the scene where they're in their dog van and they had just got away with skipping out on their bill. And Jeff Daniels' character asks Jim Carrey's character, oh, so, what happened in the movie that this whole idea you came up with was based on? And he says, they catch him half a mile down the road and slit his throat. Which, of course, is how Charles Rocket allegedly committed suicide. And then he goes on to say that in the original script, the slit his throat line was improvised. It wasn't actually in the script. But I went and looked at the script too, and nothing they say was in the original script, you know? So it was kind of like they morphed the dialogue through all the takes so that nothing was there other than what they were supposed to convey. So I don't think that really proves anything, but it's still quite a coincidence that he said that. And then it happens to Charles Rocket, who's also in the film, in the context of all the other stuff surrounding Jim Carrey and suicides in his films and just death in general. And suicides also in his real life with his ex-wife. On top of all that, I recognize child actor Jonathan Brandis in this clip. Since I'm familiar that Brandis' cause of death is suicide, I was afraid Carrey killed him too. I immediately believe Carrey murdered Brandeis after seeing his date of death, 11/12/2003, where 11 and 12 equals 23. And I think that speaks more to the Hollywood rituals than it does actually Jim Carrey, you know, where this stuff is scripted in a way that a lot of these celebrities are complicit in ritual sacrifice. Many of them have to sacrifice somebody in their family or their own life in some way to get ahead, to be further inducted into the club, as it were. And maybe they don't even pull the trigger, but there's really no difference there. You know, if they consent, yes, this is the person. I mean, you effectively pulled the trigger. You ritually sacrifice somebody. And I think that's what this stuff is getting at. It's getting at these ritual sacrifices, these blood sacrifice rituals that are demanded for whatever reason by the entities that do all of this stuff. And I think we're seeing that come through Jim Carrey's connection to all of this stuff. Not necessarily the fact that he's a serial killer on the loose, although again, it could be possible, but I doubt that's what it is. It's more likely that he is just another one of these people that has had to do the same things, and then his characters were metascripted in a certain way to subconsciously influence you in various directions whenever you see him in a film, because they're always playing out these themes over and over again. And then this account goes on to implicate Jim Carrey in the Chris Benoit murder-suicide. So I'm not going to read any more into it. I just want to note more that surrounds Jim Carrey and the things that they put into his characters. This is from The Office, when Michael Scott's character leaves the show. They're searching for his replacement, and Jim Carrey is one of the cameos. And listen to what he says here.
I want the job. I really do. It's just the rest of my family's in the Finger Lakes right now. I'm supposed to be in the Finger Lakes right now. I told him I was on a hike, snuck away to do this interview. I gotta get back pretty soon, don't worry. People disappear in the Finger Lakes.
People disappear in the Finger Lakes. And that is kind of adding to what that other person was going into about all this mysterious potential connection to murders that could be portrayed as suicides. Because, of course, Hunter Biden famously has a tattoo of the Finger Lakes on his back. There you can see the actual Finger Lakes in New York, and then the tattoo on his back, which is very clearly the Finger Lakes. So you have Jim Carrey talking about this being a place where a lot of people go missing, and Jim in the actual show refers to him as the Finger Lakes guy. And it's interesting, on the night of Joe Biden's inauguration, 3 soldiers were killed in a helicopter crash right near the Finger Lakes in Mendon, New York. Which is interesting because the Finger Lakes have a large military presence, and there's a lot of stories about underground tunnels that were used in the Civil War, and especially Seneca Lake, which is the deepest Finger Lake, used by the U.S. Navy for decades to test submarine equipment and sonar technology. So there's a large military presence, and there is documented sex trafficking going on. A man from Alabama was brought to the Finger Lakes region to face child sex trafficking charges. And it's referring to this story where you have these counties in New York surrounding the Finger Lakes involved in sex trafficking of minors. Very interesting that Hunter Biden has the Finger Lakes tattooed on his back in the context of this large military presence and sex trafficking that's going on. And then Jim Carrey says he's from the Finger Lakes, right? Referred to as the Finger Lakes guy, tying in all this dark stuff surrounding him and suicides and death and now trafficking, as that ties into Epstein. And all of that is being triggered when Jim Carrey is put into the news cycle right alongside this death and destruction that's going on in the Middle East. So anyways, I don't know if I explained that well enough because there's so many Jim Carrey movies and he's had such a long career that you could probably go through and find a bunch more stuff that would enhance what I've gone into here. This was just my initial impression about why Jim Carrey was so prominently put in the news cycle with this other stuff that related to Purim, the blood moon, and Amalek. There's something going on with what they've scripted into Jim Carrey, the character that relates to what they're doing right now. I can see that much, but I can tell as I was going over it, I wasn't quite insightful enough as to why. It's just kind of there, right? There's the Finger Lakes connection, primarily driving this as it relates to the sex trafficking there, the military presence, and the fact that people go missing there, including children all the time. As that relates to his connection via his films to suicide, and then just in general his life being connected to people committing suicide. I don't know, there's something going on there to where he was very intentionally given this Lifetime Achievement Award right before the bombs started dropping, so that they were in the news cycle together. And I kind of touched on it earlier about how their controlled opposition will be discussing a lot of wild and outlandish theories about what's going on with him at the same time that they're talking about this war and what's really going on there. And that's going to discredit a lot of the anti-war talk by design, but it's deeper than that, right? Like there's something else going on a subconscious level that is associating Jim Carrey with this Purim, blood moon, total lunar eclipse war that has taken place. So I don't know, maybe you guys can add something to that. I just thought I would throw this out there because it's something. I know it's something. And all of the stuff with Purim and the blood moon and Donald Trump is self-evident at this point, hopefully. But that's it for this one. Later.